Hello, friends! Welcome to the 20th episode of the Schoolyard Podcast, brought to you by School Specialty. I'm your host, Nancy Chung, a fun-loving teacher and content creator, also known as Fancy Nancy in Fifth on social media, and I'm thrilled that you're here. I'm so excited to announce that School Specialty is throwing a mega $50,000 school makeover sweepstakes. Get in on the action for a chance to score your school a fantastic $50,000 makeover, while 10 other schools can snag cool professional development prizes worth up to $6,500 each. School Specialty is all about spreading the love of schools across the nation, giving them the boost they need to shine bright. Because let's face it, a classroom where students feel cared for doesn't just make them happier, it also makes educators feel like superheroes. Hop on over to schoolspecialty.com/school-makeover-sweepstakes to get in on the action and check out the full scoop on the rules. Let's make some school magic happen. This is the Schoolyard Podcast, a podcast by educators for educators where the magic of learning unfolds. In the dynamic realm of education, where every student's path is distinct, effective intervention programs shine as guiding lights, illuminating the route to success. From the nuanced framework of PBIS to the holistic approach of MTSS, the pursuit of academic and behavioral excellence thrives on tailored intervention strategies. Join us as we explore the art of designing programs and learning environments that ensure interventions sparkle with efficacy and impact. In today's episode, we'll be talking to Sue Goda and Nicole Hill. Our first guest, Sue, began her career 31 years ago as a bilingual educator teacher. She has served as a Spanish dual language immersion teacher, instructional coach, and as co-administrator for her district, and was recognized as Co-Administrator of the Year for her county in 2021. She is currently serving as the District Coordinator of Expanded Learning, TK through 6th. Born in Korea, Sue spent part of her childhood in South America and was educated in the U.S. schools when her family immigrated to the U.S. As a multilingual learner herself and serving a diverse population throughout her years as an educator, Sue understands the challenges and ranges of needs and experiences of today's learners and is grateful to be able to support student achievement and growth in her district. Nicole Hill, a return guest from episode 3, has an impressive 16-year background in education where she has held various roles such as a classroom teacher, specialist, and administrator. She's certified as an educator in multiple areas, pre-K to 12th grade, within communities that were each uniquely diverse in terms of their demographics, size, and campus needs. Her expertise spans curriculum and instruction, professional development, and leadership. Welcome to the Schoolyard, Sue and Nicole.
Thank
Hi,
you.
thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for being here. Would you please tell us a little bit about yourself? Nicole, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, I think you did a really wonderful background just there. But yes, like you said, I worked predominantly in Texas as well as the Department of Defense overseas. I worked as a classroom teacher and an assistant principal, as well as a specialist. And about 3 years ago, I joined School Specialty, where I work across the country with our administrators at a district and school level to help find solutions based on their instructional goals and their needs at their campus.
Great. How about you, Sue?
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction. I am, as stated there, I've been an educator for 3 decades plus.
Wow.
Every year that I've worked with children in our communities in the elementary setting. Very fortunate to have worked with communities and families in learning languages and Title I schools and on diverse populations. So I've been very fortunate in being able to work with our communities. And now I serve as a coordinator of expanded learning. So we support our students in the before and after school programming with enrichment and academic support.
Awesome. You two are perfect for this episode as we are talking about the best intervention strategies. So the first question I would like to start with, Sue, how can schools strike a balance between identifying students in need of intervention, like early on, while avoiding premature labeling or adding stigma?
Well, I think it's really important. I mean, needless to say, you do need data, right? To know where you're starting. You need to be able
Absolutely.
to progress monitor students. But I really think nowadays with our student needs too, and the different populations that we serve, especially I'm in California, so different populations that you serve, building those relationships with the students, with the families, with the teachers that work with them to really know what their needs are, right? You are not going to know where their needs are or where they need the help until you get to know the person and where they're at. A student can be doing just fine 1 year and something can happen in their life that could really affect their learning, motivation, and engagement, which could affect their academic growth. So that would be important. Another one is to really know, were there any other student study teams or processes that were in place for the student? So really doing that research on that background and investigating to see where the students are before just saying, oh, the student goes for assessments, the students goes for that. You really need to kind of find a balance and finding and making that commitment to find out what the student needs would be.
Right. And it takes a team, right?
Definitely.
Parents, teachers, like all the staff who work with the kids. But I know Sue mentioned using data to guide us in the decision making. So in what ways can educators effectively integrate data-driven decision making into their intervention strategies?
Okay, well, kind of building on what Sue said a second ago also, we get a lot of our data from just high quality tier 1 instruction. So I think that all starts there, right? And we know as educators, there's a lot of different ways that we can collect this data. And I definitely think that like having a plan as a school and as a district about what that's going to look like and how we're going to utilize that data, how we're going to collect it in that informal and even formal assessments, and then how we're going to work collaboratively and analyze that, what we're expecting to see when we look at student work samples, what we're expecting is like what the performance we expect to see on even like our standardized assessments. So I think a big part of making great data-driven decisions is again like having that vision and having that understanding amongst your team about what the plan, what the vision, what the focus is going to be, and then being consistent, right? Being consistent, coming back to that. And even the documentation, I think like, I mean, as an administrator, just like how we document these types of things, it's a really important, right? We utilize that across grade levels. So like if you have a 3rd grade student, we want to see what they did in 1st grade. We want to see how the student responded. We want to see how they adjusted their intervention techniques and I would say their strategies, their resources, their tools. So in regards to just also obviously the types of interventions and supports and materials that you're utilizing, right? Is it are they valuable? Are they meaningful? Are they making an impact for the students? So it's not like a lot of the data that we've collected is clearly impacted by how that instruction was delivered and what tools we use to deliver it. And so again, we have to analyze, and then we have to look back and think, is there something we should kind of change and tweak to make that better moving forward? So
okay. Sue, anything to add to that?
Well, I was just saying the use of data definitely, but also, using that to really drill down. I loved what Nicole had said earlier too about how is it being used? What was it done years prior? And right away, I think in that way, progress monitoring, and you need data for that too, to make sure that you are doing and going the right way, right? You can't, if you're not having any success in what you're doing, there's no sense in doing it for 6 to 8 more weeks,
right.
without any results. So really looking and progress monitoring. And I think being very strategic about the strategies that are being used and targeting to what the students' needs are at, I think that's going to be really important too.
That's true. I think as beginning teachers, a lot of the times they're given a list of all these assessments to give their students. And so they do administer all these assessments, and they get the data and they don't know quite what to do with it.
Yeah.
So the whole progress monitoring and coming up with different strategies based on what the data shows, like I think there's definitely a big need to train teachers how to analyze data. Like,
Yes.
like what are you doing with the data, right? So not just what does the data show, but how are we going to use this data? What kind of strategies are we going to use to help these students?
Yeah. Or where do you even start, right? So I know
Right.
you mentioned new teachers. A lot of new teachers are like, I did my due diligence.
Yeah.
Mhm.
My pre-assessment. All the numbers are in and recorded.
Right.
Then what? And this is where
Exactly.
sometimes our newer teachers or even our veteran teachers, we
Mhm.
can get very overwhelmed. And I think that's
Mhm.
when you have to think about really going, even when things seem daunting, you want to meet everybody's needs in our, classrooms. You have to really think about, okay, little by little, what's the
Right.
first bite that I can take? What's the
Mhm.
first thing that I can do so
Right.
that I can help for movement forward, right? For the
Mhm. Mhm.
students,
Yeah.
movement toward growth. And so that's why
Right.
we always say, you have the data, what do you do with it now? And I just
Mhm.
remember, I don't know if you have seen this, but we've used it before in our PLCs or PDs too. That picture of a big elephant. How do you take a bite out of an elephant? Have you ever seen any of those?
I
There's a thing
haven't.
where it says,
Uh-huh.
how do you, it was like a Desmond Tutu meme or something that said,
Mhm.
how do you eat an elephant? Where do you start? And it was, there's only one way to do that, and that's one bite at a time. So in the same way, we
Mhm.
tell our teachers, you have all this data. What is the first thing that you can do? What is the
Right.
first thing that we could do? And
Mhm.
start moving little
Yeah.
step at a time. And that's
Start
why we
small, but
start.
start.
Yes,
Getting
that's a
started
huge
is, I
one.
think, half
Start.
the challenge,
Yep,
right?
yep,
Yeah.
yeah.
So drawing from personal experiences or anecdotes, how do personalized learning plans contribute to the overall effectiveness of student intervention programs? And considering the cultural diversity within educational settings, how can intervention strategies be sensitively tailored? Sue, what do you think?
It has to be sensitively tailored, especially
Mhm.
nowadays with our students, right?
Mhm.
Since COVID, it's been said that every single student has experienced trauma because the
Right.
whole world went through COVID, right?
Mhm.
So being sensitive to that, and I think it's really important to know the student, knowing their styles, their needs, what makes them shut down, what makes them open up, what makes
Mhm.
them take that risk to learn, right? And that's so
Mhm.
important. And it reminds me of a recent conversation I had with a parent who really wanted to help his son with learning high frequency words. And
Mhm.
as he was talking to me, he was saying, gosh, we were working, we're practicing, he just can't get these high frequency words. And I was working with him right before bedtime, and I looked at his gaze, and he was gazing at his pile of words not read yet, or not, he didn't get them yet. And the
Mhm.
pile of words that he had read, which was smaller. And he
Mhm.
goes, I literally physically saw my son's shoulders droop. And
Oh,
it made me go,
oh,
and he's a little one, he's like a first grader. So he
uh-huh.
went, oh my goodness, like
Mhm.
I have to stop. This is so sad. And so
Mhm.
as he's talking to me, Dad also said, okay, this isn't working. The right before bedtime thing isn't working. And the
Mhm.
further conversation we had was, okay, are you doing this instead of something? What did you do before the high frequency words came into play? Oh, well, that
Mhm.
was our bedtime reading story. That was our talk.
Oh.
How was your day story? That was our maybe noticing some things about shapes and things, exciting science things that he did that day.
Mhm.
And it kind of went to him going, oh, maybe giving him this pile of words to read, you have to do them before you go to bed, wasn't
Mhm.
the best time to do it. So
Mhm.
he readjusted, right?
Mhm.
Kind of went, okay, this might not have been a good strategy or a good time. And
Mhm.
so even looking into that, so the connection that I made to as an educator, teachers too, we need to think about, when are we doing the intervention? How are we doing it? Who is our audience, right? Our students have different needs. One student could love just going, I'm going to get it done, check, done. Other students could be like, give me some time to get into the process. You really have to know your students
Mhm.
and really know what's their style, what's their needs, and how they respond to instruction. And you
Mhm.
have to consider that when you're doing your intervention planning, I think.
That's so true. And Nicole, you said you were primarily in Texas, but you were all over too. Like you were in, I think, Europe, and you said you work with students overseas too. So cultural diversity definitely has a huge impact on what kind of intervention strategies you would use. So what about you? Do you have any personal experiences or stories?
Okay. So, for example, a really popular practice for a while in different places was flexible grouping with students, maybe during, and I know that some people have moved on beyond this, but you hear about the power hours and everything like that. And then I think there's some value in almost any practice if it's done well and done consistently and with the right resources. But this is a good example of maybe just paying attention to your students would be when you are doing flexible grouping, even sometimes there is like an insecurity or an uncomfortableness if like you're doing flexible grouping by ages or by like mixing kids with different students in different classrooms, and that can either be like a very positive outcome of flexible grouping across like grade levels or within a school, or it could be really negative, right? So you can see you always hear this bad example of putting a third grade, or I say third, let's say fourth this time, since I said third earlier. So a fourth grader in a third grade classroom. Well, that could be really uncomfortable for a student. It's really not something we necessarily always encourage. So you have to like think about like the dynamic of the students, if that's really going to be powerful for them, or if it's going to be more of a hindrance, if it's going to hurt more than it's going to help. And I just know that that's like it's just a practice we still see across the country, and that again, you just have to kind of weigh the student's reaction and their response, and if they're building their confidence, because that's such an important part of working in a small group, is just making a student feel confident in their ability to be successful with that content.
Right. When you were sharing that story, it brought back a painful memory. No, I immigrated to the US when I was 10 and I didn't speak any English. And so and my school, I was one of the 2 Asian students, and the other one was my brother who was in 3rd grade. I was in 5th grade, and the teachers didn't know what to do with me. And so, and I don't know what kind of intervention programs were in place, but at that time, I was pulled out for 45 minutes to go to an ESL class. But the other times, my teacher had this wonderful idea of sending me to the kindergarten class. And so I sat there in kindergarten, and I still remember like what the textbook looked like, because I was mortified. Like all the little kids were looking at me like, what is she doing here? She's big. And she doesn't, I don't know how I understand. Like my memory right now is all in English. I don't know how I understood, but I just felt so humiliated because they're looking at me like, how come she doesn't know how to read? How come she can't talk? How come she can't speak? And so like what you just said, Nicole, like sometimes I think those interventions, can be detrimental to the students' confidence and ego. And, I don't know if I learned anything. I just remember staring at I think it was like Cascades, like a textbook. And I just remember staring at the picture going, I want to jump into this waterfall right now, Sue, so you immigrated from South America. So what were intervention programs like when you jumped into school?
I think it was similar. If they, was get the English into them somehow, some way. Fortunately, the schools that I was at, because my 2 brothers were all in elementary school, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade all together. And so they pull us out, and, thankfully we did more game-based things. So it was comfortable, but I was thinking about when you were saying, yet you remember, even though you don't remember what you learned, it was so vividly ingrained in you, like as a trauma, you remember it not as something that's like joyful or whatever it be, right? So you think about that. And then when we do that to our students, we mean well, but when we do that and wonder, why isn't Joe learning? Why isn't Susie getting better? It's because they can't learn when they're feeling mortified, embarrassed, or they're feeling like I don't belong, I don't need to be here, or I can't be here. So we really need to be mindful of that with our students and really uphold their dignity, if you will, even though they're kids, right?
At any age group. Yeah. At any level.
Yes.
So like both of you guys worked with so many different schools and different communities and different age groups. What challenges might educators encounter when implementing intervention programs?
There's no time. When are we supposed to do this? And then, that's when we have to think about, okay, let's stop and see what resources and personnel do we have? How are we utilizing our time? Honestly, because when you don't step back and look at it, and there are teachers who use every minute of their every single time most efficiently and effectively. And then there are others that might realize, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that that took me all of 15 minutes. Could I in that time quickly pull a group, or could I have a volunteer or a student teacher? Or, local universities have students who have to take classes as tutors. So are they in there, and can they help out in some areas? It doesn't have to be deep as in, they're not ready to do comprehension intervention, but could they be there for a student, depending on that, just needs to work on decoding or reading fluency practice, or just needs to do a quick practice on accuracy. It doesn't have to be a 20-minute long lesson. So kind of seeing how can I use the personnel or the people around me or the resources to kind of help when I, as a teacher, don't have the time because I'm actually teaching, which is what I'm doing. I'm doing core tier 1 instruction, right? So thinking about that, I was thinking about when I had a parent in 3rd grade. She, stay-at-home mom, said, I used to be a teacher. I don't have time to teach, but I love working with kids. And so I asked her, can you come in once a week, twice a week, just for 1 hour? And that's all she did. She came in, she picked up her little basket, she had her name of kids. The kids went back with her, read with her, whatever the reader was. She had very basic comprehension questions, if that's what we were working on. That's what she did. And then she'd leave. And the kids knew, every Wednesday, Mrs. X is coming in for 10 minutes. That's it, 10 minutes, but it was consistent, right? So utilizing, and not every year are you going to have a volunteer or somebody that's there, but who's around you that you can, right, reach out to help. And I think that's one of them. Consistency is so important. It doesn't matter how great your intervention program is. If you don't have consistency, if you do great 1 year and then it's gone the next year, not going to be good. So having that consistency is going to be a challenge, but it's something that you have to look at at your site.
Yeah.
So
one of the problems that I sometimes encounter in our school community too is sometimes when we want to provide certain intervention programs, there could be a little bit of resistance from the parents, saying, oh, my child doesn't need that, or, oh, I can't bring them, 30 minutes early. So what do you do when there's a little bit of resistance with parents?
I think that's huge. That parent buy-in, that was big. When we I worked, in a Title I school where, families are busy living, doing life. So having my kid there after school or before school, sometimes it's hard, but that's when you have a conversation. That's when you bring in the data. This is where your student is at, not at grade level. This is exactly where we need help. This is where we're going to work on strategically. And intervention, you're not doing this for the whole year, right? The best intervention, it works at 6 to 8 week cycles in small group settings, really giving the students what they need at that time, the skills needed and the help needed, and then showing the progress. I think the buy-in part is really important for students and families alike.
So true.
When they see progress, when they see that my efforts are making an impact. And that's how we've had buy-in from our parents, who might say, no, I really, really, really can't. But can you spare 30 minutes after school? Can you spare 1 hour after school? 2 weeks later, look at where your student is at. Can we hang it on for 4 more weeks? And then before you know it, as the student's progressing, they really do see the value in it. And that's how you catch them. You might not catch all of them, but still so the buy-in is so important, and letting them know. And it's important. I see it more. It's important for our kids to celebrate, and for our teachers and our classrooms to know, oh my gosh, what we're doing is working. Yay. And so the celebration, I think, is a big part of getting the buy-in too from students as well as the families.
That is so true. Okay, I didn't share this with the listeners yet, but Sue is actually a really good personal friend of mine, and she has really served as a mentor. And she was the first classroom I observed, and she's one of the main reasons why I became a teacher. And I know, and we've had so many conversations about how to handle certain situations. And I remember I was teaching an intervention group, a reading intervention group many, many years ago. And one of the tips that Sue gave me that really resonated was you have to celebrate every progress, even if it's really, really little. So you have to celebrate those as big milestones, and that'll get the students buy-in. Because when you're saying, even if they're still below proficiency, when you say, oh, you grew this many points, or you grew, and you celebrate the progress, they're going to be motivated and encouraged to do even better and do even more. And so that's like that little bit of advice that I received from you many years ago that I still make sure. So make sure to share with my students. So even if they're still way below, I say, oh, you are growing, you are improving, and they will really build up their confidence and will, you know, live up to your expectation and your praises too.
And they will. And thank you for remembering that. I didn't even remember that. But I'm a
That was
very
years ago.
celebration-oriented person
Mm-hmm.
because I've seen it work.
Mm-hmm.
This is when and then the students also see, oh my goodness, my teacher is vested in my progress. She's just as
Right.
happy as I am.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to
Yeah.
do more,
Yeah.
right?
And she believes in me, right?
Yes. And the
Uh-huh.
students that are really having a hard time making those gains that they expected,
Mm-hmm.
could get discouraged. But when you go, but look at what you did, let's focus. You keep focusing them on that forward movement
Mm-hmm.
and you keep pushing them forward just a little bit, just a little bit. And I
Mm-hmm.
really think that that will add up, right? For
Mm-hmm.
them really being seeing the success and being able to celebrate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So if I could ask you to offer advice regarding intervention to a teacher struggling to find something that that works for their kids, what would be like one quick little advice that you would give them? I know you said, I know earlier some of the things that we mentioned was start small, start somewhere.
That's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say you don't have to. Sometimes people become overwhelmed and they're like very insecure. More is certainly we've learned. I mean, that's true pretty much all throughout teaching. Is more is usually not better. You certainly have to have like multiple data points and multiple like resources, but it doesn't have to be a lot, right? It just have to you have to know how to do a few things well. So start small and do that well and because otherwise, like when you try to do too much at one time, you will most certainly not be successful and you'll feel very just unfulfilled, I think, because it's just too much to handle.
Right.
You have all this other stuff that you're doing, and this is a whole separate job that you have on your plate. So
Students can feel overwhelmed, teachers can burn out, you know, lots of negative things that could come from it. Okay. How about you, Sue?
I would say don't do it alone. I mean, in the end, you're in the classroom with those students and you're doing the intervention, but you are at a school site with a team of veteran, new, excellent, educated people who love what they do, who love education, who are good at what they do. So tap into those resources to ask, what are some things I've tried some things? What are some things that I could try? And most schools now do, if you have a student study team, if you have a resource team, go to them. Go to your resource team, people who are at your sites too, to find out what are some other things that we can do together. Are there opportunities to collaborate? They may have ideas that you haven't tried. Going and seeing other people do intervention or some of the things that are doing are practices you can modify to your grade level and help your students too. So definitely tapping into the systems or the people or the mentors or the resources that are available to you at your school site is what I would say. Don't try to do it alone. You can't do it alone. We're not meant to do it alone.
Exactly. And turn everything into a learning experience, right? If one doesn't work, try another one. But having somebody going on this journey with you to try different things and supporting one another, I think will be very beneficial.
Definitely.
Right. Well, I learned so much today. Well, okay, so we have this segment on our podcast called Tag Your It, where our listeners write in with a question and our guests answer it. And today's question is a little silly. It's a little fun one. It comes from Rebecca P. And the question is, would you rather be the funniest person or the smartest person in the room? You're like, what?
I would want to be the funniest person because I'm not. Because I really definitely think humor has a way of making things, easier. You're more relatable. You're more approachable. A smiling face is much better than one that looks all, intellectual.
Yeah. How about you, Nicole?
That's a hard question because I kind of agree with Sue in that like funny makes you charismatic and that gets you so much further in life. Because that's a 21st century skill we're all talking about. Like being likable and approachable. I think I still would want to be the smartest person in the room though, because there's just so much to know out there.
I know.
I could make such an impact. I could cure diseases and who knows, sky's the limit. So
nothing is good for the soul.
I know.
Can't we
I think that's why I love teaching, because I brainwash my students into thinking that I'm the funniest person in the room.
And there's so much humor and so many things to laugh about just when you're with kids.
Right.
Just everything. And
even if it's not really laughable, it just makes things better when you just laugh it off, because it's either you cry or you laugh, or you laugh. And I think it's better to choose laughter over tears. Okay. Well, Sue and Nicole, thank you so much for being such insightful guests on the Schoolyard Podcast. It was such a pleasure and so educational discussing the best intervention strategies with you both. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Great. Thank you. Bye. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Schoolyard Podcast. Remember to pack your curiosity and meet us back in the schoolyard for our next episode. Tag, you're it. Now it's your turn to write in with a question, which we will answer here on the Schoolyard Podcast for our segment called Tag, You're It. Tag us on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, or Twitter @SchoolSpecialty and hashtag Schoolyard Tag You're It with a question that you want answered. One question will be selected per episode to be answered by our featured guest and myself. If your question is chosen to be answered on the podcast, we'll send you a very special Schoolyard Podcast t-shirt. Class dismissed.